Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Lindsay Briggs, and this is Start Now by Syracuse University. If you're interested in how trailblazing entrepreneurs got their start during their college years, then stick around. We can't wait to share this innovator's insight on how to run a successful business. Let's get started. And today we have Jeff Burton, the founder of Electronic Arts and the executive director of Skydeck. And he is, I know you guys know all about him, especially if you're into gaming and you're a gamer. So without further ado, thank you so much, Jeff, for being with us and coming on the show and sharing your story. So welcome.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's my pleasure. I always enjoy talking about electronic arts. Before we started Electronic Arts, I was an executive at Atari. A couple of years into that, a former classmate of mine at Stanford, who had been at Apple Computer for the 4 years since we had graduated from business school. He called me and he said, Jeff, if you were going to do a startup in this field, would you choose would you choose to start a company that did hardware or develop software? And I immediately said, of course, software, because hardware was well, first of all, I'm not technical, so, but dealing with software was where I thought the industry was going to really grow and thrive. And I really felt like it was time that the people who wrote the games, software, the video games for Atari, really deserved to be more celebrated. I believed, and as did my colleagues, that the economic incentive for software developers, for game developers, should be thrown onto into their laps more fully than had transpired up to that point. We really felt like the people who wrote the products should enjoy a royalty, a lifetime royalty for everything that was sold that they had written, and so that's when my classmate he agreed. He said, "Oh, that's the way I feel too." So he invited me to a dinner at his house with 5 other people. The 6 of us got together at his home, and we had a long evening of dinner and extended way into the wee hours of the morning, talking about first getting to know each other. Right. And we were all Stanford grads. So we weren't in the same classes really, but we were all Stanford grads, and that kind of tied us together in a way. And so we got to know each other and talked about what we had done and what we wanted to do, and what our attitude was toward the way we wanted a company, if we started one, to feel and to operate. And so I walked away from that dinner thinking, oh my God, I cannot miss the opportunity of joining this group should it come together. Right. And about a month later, I got a call from the classmate that originally contacted me, that I'd known for many years, and he said, "Okay, I want to ask you if you're ready to leave your executive position at Atari and join this startup and become a founder. But I just want you to know that all the other people at dinner in July have agreed to leave their positions and join." And I was naive enough to not realize that I didn't know if the other people had been asked or had agreed to join, but I said, "Oh, okay. In that case, I'm in. I want to be with this group." And Later, of course, I found out that that's what he told everybody, and so we came together in that manner. And in later August, we joined, and we didn't have any office space. So one of our lead investors, Sequoia Capital, this is Don Valentine, who is a legend in the venture capital community in Silicon Valley. He gave us a conference room in the Sequoia Capital's offices, so that we could at least have a conference room to start, drawing on whiteboards and making plans and getting into it until we could obtain our office space. Fortunately for us, our the guy that pulled us together, who we all agreed would be the CEO of the company, he had was lucky enough to be like, I don't remember what number at Apple, but he was like employee number 52 in 1978, 2 years after the company had started. So he had a substantial amount of stock in the company when it went public in 1980. And so he was able to fund our what would now be called seed capital, our seed round. He did that out of his own pocket. So he paid for our first office space. He covered the salaries that we all obtained to begin with, which were significantly less than we were making at our former corporations. But we had a substantial amount of stock as a founder, and so that compensated us for that, and we were able to all start in about September of 1982. We put together a business plan. Back then, that was required. Now it's decks or a video or a variety of different possibilities for making a pitch to an investor group. But we had a business plan, and that got us. We got that turned around. Let's see, we submitted it in like end of September, early October. It took us about a month to write. It was 100 pages, and Don Valentine said this was the best business plan he had seen to that date. And so despite the fact that we didn't have any product and we weren't technical people, we were all marketing people, we got funding by November. We got our funds delivered in November. It usually takes a good 4 to 6 months these days to receive the funding from a venture firm, but we did it in about 2.5 months, and so we were quite lucky. So we recruited a technical officer, a chief technical officer from the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, and he was just stellar. And so we relied on him, but the rest of us, one of the things that I think maybe in a high-tech world, and that was certainly the case back in 1982 here in Silicon Valley, engineers were starting companies, and we weren't engineers, but one of the I think things that sort of caused some trepidation among investors was that engineers, they didn't know anything about marketing, and lots of times their attitude was, and I think still is to a certain extent, that engineers think if they make a terrific product, it's the best possible product, that the sales will just come their way. People will run to their doorway and say, "Can I buy that?" And that's not usually what happens. So the fact that we were a strong marketing team, and we were definitely headed toward consumer marketing because we were doing video games for consumers. I think that the venture capitalists that we attracted could see that there was a real benefit in having a strong marketing and sales organization for these consumer products, and it turned out that the way we launched the company with the corporate ID and with the advertising agency that we actually gave life to. It's called Goodby Silverstein, and they were terrifically creative. And the first advertisement that they created for us was a double-page spread in Newsweek and Popular Mechanics. We put them in those two magazines back in 1982. And the title of the ad was, "Can a computer make you cry?" And that was so unusual as a, you know, as an intro for a company that created our ID, and our corporate ID, and it was a thoughtful one. We had a phrase that described what the attributes of the games we produced we wanted them to be, and it was using 3 words: simple, hot, and deep. And I'd say that our first 7 products that we produced within 6 months, we released within 6 months, fulfilled a lot of that promise. And one of the things we did, which was really hard too, is that we decided to, in the consumer industry, consumer business, we decided we would sell directly to retail stores, which was basically unheard of for software, computer software companies at the time. They all went through distributors. And so there were just lots and lots of mom and pop computer stores all over the country. Back then, as I said, there was no internet. We had yellow pages. So I'd fly into a city, rent a car, get a map of the city and yellow pages, and I would look up I'd look up computer stores. So I would I just make my own list, drive from one store to the next all day long, making cold calls. So I didn't know who the people were that owned the stores. I didn't have any contacts there. I just walked into the front door of the store and said, "I'm Jeff Burton from Electronic Arts." And they'd say, "Electronic parts?" "No, Electronic Arts. We're a software game company." And they said, "Oh, well, games, we're not so sure." And then I'd take the packages out of my briefcase and say, "Well, let me just show you some of the products that we have." And the front and the back of the packaging was filled with, really, really nice graphics, photographs, and interesting stuff that we had package experts in San Francisco, designers, do. And so as soon as the store owners saw them, they'd say, "Oh, I've got to have those." And I'd say, "Okay, great. How many would you like?" And they'd say, 2 of each. We only had 7 products.
Yeah.
So I'd say, "Okay, that's great." They'd say, "I want 1 to show and 1 to go." Okay, fine. Only 2. So, and what we saw was, as I was spending the month going from store to store in all these major cities in these regions, was that at the home office, they'd ship out 2 of each title, and then within less than a week, in many cases, there'd be reorders, and the reorders would be for 5 of each title, because they really sold through fast, and the mom and pop retailers loved that. So we made a huge investment of time and effort to go cold calling on retail stores, and it really paid off for.
Was that originally a part of the business plan, selling directly to retailers?
Yeah, we planned that because we wanted to be really different. We wanted to make an impact in a different way.
Now, the selling and the approach with retailers, we call that customer validation, and we're taught to listen. Was that what did retailers tell you about? What did they tell you about that helped your business?
We really were able to launch ourselves into the major retailers, and then we established good, strong relationships with them. after our first year of sales, we projected about, we projected, I think, $20 million in sales as after our first full year. We expected to have that. Our actuals were like 5 million. So we really overestimated how much we could sell in our first year. And we thought, oh my gosh, maybe the video game market industry is just not ready to support what we were expecting to achieve and growth and all that stuff. So we thought maybe we better try to get into productivity software. We spent over $1 million on the company. We spent $1 million on packaging and preparing everything for it, and we just really failed at that. I mean, we couldn't sell it through. I mean, we put it out there, but it just didn't sell. So we had to just kind of withdraw that and go back to focusing on video games. We said to ourselves, we've got to stick to our knitting, and that was what we were doing. Was originally games, and we wasted a year on productivity, and that just didn't work. So the ability to change directions,
Right.
even if it's just a slight change, but the ability to change directions is absolutely essential when you're starting a company. And you have to be therefore aware of everything that's going on around you and responding to it.
With the industry now, do you see a lot of non-technical people coming into the industry and finding a home within the industry like you did?
Everybody that came to the company got stock in the company, which I think is very motivating and important. Here in Silicon Valley, when a company succeeds, the people who have earned who've received a lot of money as a result of their success, here in Silicon Valley, they're always investing their rewards into other companies, into other startups. So there's a virtuous cycle of success and then investing in companies that are small and startups.
There are research studies that indicate that global travel helps people learn to be more resilient and how to handle uncertainty. Do you agree with that?
Just last weekend, that my classmates from my graduation class celebrated our 50th reunion at Stanford. We all got back together and discussed what a major impact studying abroad had made in our lives. Not everybody was doing international business. I was the only one really that went into international business after that. Others were lawyers and doctors and teachers and stuff. But everybody agreed that one of the most impressionable times of our lives was when we were in Italy as students.
Right.
And we traveled all over Europe when we were there. To travel successfully, you have to be resilient. Flights are delayed, trains don't run on time. It's one of those things that forces you to make yourself feel okay about everything. It's going to work out, and you always find a way to make it work.
What European startups are you working with now?
I wanted to be sure that I kept apprised of what the sort of leading edge in what I thought was the leading edge is the leading edge in the gaming world. And so now I'm the chairman of the advisory board for a company in Lithuania that is a crypto gaming company. One of the most fascinating things to me about this company is about 40 people. They are well funded. They are creating a AAA game that is going to remunerate people, gamers, players, users of the product for the amount of time that they spend and engage with the product. Because one of the things that makes an entertainment software product successful is having users the gamers that spend hours upon hours in the game. Now, that's time, and time is valuable. And until now, there's not really been an easy, good way to somehow or another expand the distribution of the economic gains to the people who are actually using the product and playing the game. And now with cryptocurrency and NFTs and the blockchain and that all of that kind of that whole Web3 aspect of things, it's changing the paradigm of the whole workings of economics around video games. And I think it's just like we thought when we started electronic arts that the programmers should have a piece of the action. There's some better compensation for the amount of work that they put into creating a game. I can see that there's a possibility for game players, to start recouping or generating some benefits, some financial benefits to themselves, just by spending a lot of time with the game. Also, I have a company in another one in Lithuania that has created a metaverse called the Learniverse. It's teaching. It's an online education company, which has been in existence for the last 5 years, working with people who are trying to acquire digital skills, programming skills online. They're refocusing everything to provide education and learning for people who want to get into Web3, who want to understand and learn about blockchains, about cryptocurrencies, about NFTs, all of that kind of thing. And the third area of startup companies that I'm involved with right now is telehealth, because that's another huge opportunity that almost anybody can get into now without even having to be a doctor. I mean, it's really an interesting industry to watch and to be part of. So those are the three that I like: education, I like gaming, and I like healthcare.
Looking back, what would you tell your younger self to do to prepare for the future?
Wow. One thing that I haven't touched on, and it is super important, and that is maintaining a life balance, a work and life balance. I had 2 children. We didn't have kids before I started electronic arts, and I was 35 before we had children. And I realized I was still involved with international business, so I was spending a week each month in London at our subsidiary I'd opened there. And then after I opened the Japanese subsidiary, I was spending a week each month in Tokyo with the company that I'd created there for electronic arts. And that left me only 2 weeks at home, and they weren't contiguous weeks.
Right.
So I missed the first few years of my kids' childhoods. And children develop so fast when they're really young that by the time my son was 5, and I thought, he'll start school in another year or so, and then I won't have any influence on him, because it'll all be his teachers and his friends at school, and all that. It'll start pulling away from, the sort of the intimate influence that I could have on my kids. And fortunately, the company was going public at that time, so I was able to basically retire and then just pay attention to my kids growing up. And that's what I focused on for the next 20 years of my life. And so I have to say that you always need to pay attention to, what your life balance, work and home, and really, if somebody says, what was the best thing you did in your life? And I'd say, I raised my kids. That was the best thing I accomplished. Forget about electronic arts.
That's something to celebrate. What would you tell the college students who are watching tonight, especially ones who are thinking about entrepreneurship?
you really need to do your best to find something that feels like you can be passionate about, that you really are willing to spend 10 hours a day focusing on or in. And for me, providing experiences for people with an inanimate computer where they might be able to feel some kind of connection to characters in a game, and they loved their experience doing it. That's what I was really passionate about.
Thank you so much, Jeff Burton, for joining us tonight, sharing your stories with transparency, vulnerability, and much inspiration. And we really appreciate you coming on the platform and just sharing so much invaluable information with us tonight. You can join us next time on our next session of Start Now with great innovators, founders, and entrepreneurs. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye. Join us next time on another episode of Start Now. To see more episodes, visit newhouse.syr.edu/startnow.